Sable Winters moved through the main hallway of Lincoln High School like a shadow, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum tiles beneath her worn sneakers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh white glow across rows of green lockers that lined both sides of the corridor. Students flowed around her in clusters, their voices creating a constant din of laughter and conversation. But none of those voices called her name. None of those groups paused to include her. She had transferred to this suburban Ohio school 6 weeks ago, arriving mid-semester with nothing but a backpack full of textbooks and a determination to remain invisible. The first Monday had passed without incident. Sable had navigated the unfamiliar building with careful attention, memorizing the route from her locker to each classroom, identifying the quiet corners of the cafeteria where she could eat lunch unnoticed, locating the library's most secluded study carrel. She kept her head down during classes, never volunteering answers even when she knew them, never making eye contact with the other students who turned to stare at the new girl with her second-hand clothes and thrift store backpack. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 100 pounds, with her dark hair pulled into a perpetual ponytail and her oversized hoodie hiding her frame, Sable understood that she looked like an easy target. She had learned that lesson at her previous school. Smaller than the other two, but meaner, with a sharp face and sharper tongue, who specialized in cutting remarks that left psychological scars. The third was Judson Fell, who followed less out of admiration and more out of fear, understanding that being in Garrison's inner circle meant protection from becoming a target himself. The incident started small, a shoulder bump in the hallway that sent Sable stumbling into a locker, Garrison's voice floating back with a careless, "Watch where you're going, charity case." Her books knocked from her hands, papers scattering across the floor, while other students stepped over and around them without helping, whispered comments that followed her from class to class, just loud enough for her to hear, designed to remind her of her place in the school's hierarchy. Sable absorbed each incident without reaction, bending to pick up her books, steadying herself after each shove, keeping her expression carefully blank. She had learned long ago that reactions fed bullies, that any sign of anger or hurt or fear was like gasoline on a fire. But her lack of reaction seemed to frustrate Garrison rather than discourage him. By the 4th week, the incidents had escalated. Her locker was vandalized with crude words, written in permanent marker. Someone dumped chocolate milk over her lunch tray, soaking her food and spattering her clothes. During gym class, when the teacher stepped out, Brixton shoved her hard from behind, sending her sprawling across the polished floor of the gymnasium. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and for just a moment Sable's training surfaced. Her body wanted to roll with the fall, to turn the momentum into something controlled, to come up in a defensive stance. But she forced herself to land awkwardly instead, to stay down longer than necessary, to push herself up slowly with trembling hands, because revealing what she could do would mean questions she couldn't answer, would mean breaking the promise she had made 3 years ago at her father's graveside. Master Sergeant David Winters had been career military, serving 3 tours overseas before retiring to open a small Krav Maga and kickboxing gym in their hometown. Sable had grown up in that gym, learning to throw punches before she could ride a bike, drilling defensive techniques while other children played soccer. Her father had trained her with the same intensity he had brought to training soldiers, teaching her that real self-defense wasn't about sport or competition. It was about survival, about ending threats quickly and efficiently, about protecting yourself and others at any cost. Sable had been 12 when her father died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, and in the chaos of grief and financial collapse that followed, she had made a choice. At the funeral, standing beside the flag-draped coffin, she had promised her father's memory that she would never use violence unless there was no other choice, that she wouldn't become someone who solved problems with their fists, that she would honor his training by showing the restraint he had always emphasized was the true mark of a warrior. That promise had carried her through 3 different schools in 3 years as her mother struggled to find stable work and affordable housing. It had kept her hands at her sides when boys twice her size had shoved her, when girls had mocked her clothes and her poverty, when teachers had looked the other way and administrators had suggested that maybe she was the problem, that maybe moving so often meant there was something wrong with her. Sable had learned to be invisible, to absorb punishment without reacting, to survive until she could graduate and escape into a life of her own making. At Lincoln High, she told herself it would be the same. Keep your head down, don't react, get through this semester and the next, and the one after that, just survive. But Garrison Holt was different from the bullies she had encountered before. He was relentless, creative, and most dangerously, he seemed to take her lack of reaction as a personal challenge. By the 5th week, he had recruited more followers, students who wanted to be associated with his power, who laughed at his jokes and participated in tormenting Sable because it earned them status, or at least protected them from becoming targets themselves. The hallways became a gauntlet where Sable never knew when someone would trip her or, "So you're the charity case Garrison's been talking about," one of them said, examining her manicured nails with theatrical disinterest. "I don't get it. Why don't you just leave, transfer somewhere else? No one wants you here." Sable had dried her hands slowly, mechanically, meeting none of their eyes. "Excuse me," she said quietly, trying to move toward the door. One of the girls stepped into her path, close enough that Sable could smell her perfume, expensive and cloying. "I'm talking to you," the girl said, her voice hardening. For a fraction of a second, Sable's training had screamed at her to act. The girl was too close, had left herself vulnerable, could be controlled with a simple wrist lock and leverage. But Sable had forced herself to step back instead, to lower her eyes, to wait in submissive silence until the girls had finished their performance and left her alone in the bathroom where she had stood for 5 minutes afterward, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the sink, reminding herself why she couldn't fight back, couldn't become what her father had spent years training her to be. But that encounter had marked a shift. The next day, Sable had stayed after school, finding an empty corner of the gymnasium where wrestling practice was taking place at the other end. She had spent 30 minutes drilling the basics, her footwork, her guard, the fundamental movements that kept her body ready and reactive. The familiar motions had centered her, reminded her of who she was beneath the mask of helplessness she wore. She had been careful to stop before anyone noticed, to slip out of the gym before the wrestlers finished their practice. But those 30 minutes had rekindled something inside her that weeks of abuse had nearly extinguished. The weekends were Sable's only respite. Her mother worked doubles most weekends, leaving Sable alone in their cramped apartment in the cheaper part of town. She spent those hours maintaining her training in the tiny living room, moving furniture to create space, drilling techniques on the worn carpet until sweat soaked through her shirt. She would open her laptop and watch videos of professional fighters, studying their movements, their strategies, reminding herself that she hadn't forgotten how to defend herself, that she was choosing not to. There was a difference between being helpless and choosing restraint. And Sable needed those reminders to get through the weeks ahead. The 7th week of the semester brought a shift in the weather and a shift in Sable's life. October had settled into November, the Ohio autumn turning cold and gray, trees bare against overcast skies, the kind of weather that made the fluorescent-lit hallways of Lincoln High feel like a refuge even when they weren't. It was a Tuesday morning when Sable first saw her in the library during study hall. The girl sat at one of the tables near the windows, surrounded by textbooks and colored pens, her auburn hair falling forward as she bent over her notes. Something about her concentration drew Sable's attention, the way she seemed completely absorbed in her work, oblivious to the social dynamics that governed the rest of the school. Sable had chosen a table several rows away, settling into her usual practice of making herself invisible, but she found her eyes returning to the other girl throughout the period. There was something different about her, something that suggested she existed slightly outside the normal hierarchy of Lincoln High. Her clothes were neither expensive nor cheap, her appearance neither carefully styled nor deliberately casual. She simply was, without the performative quality that seemed to define everyone else Sable had encountered. When the bell rang and students began gathering their materials, Sable had been reaching for her backpack when she knocked her pencil case off the table. Pens and pencils scattered across the floor, rolling under chairs and nearby tables. Sable had dropped to her knees, reaching under furniture, aware of other students stepping over and around her supplies without pause, when a hand had appeared in her peripheral vision, offering her 3 pens and a highlighter. "I think these are yours," the auburn-haired girl said, her voice warm and without judgment. Sable had looked up, momentarily startled, and found herself meeting green eyes that held genuine kindness. "Thank you," she had managed, taking the pens, expecting the interaction to end there. But the girl had knelt down as well, helping to collect the rest of the scattered supplies. "I'm Bellamy," she said, as they gathered the last few pencils. "Bellamy Crane. You're new this semester, right? I've seen you around." "Sable," she had replied quietly, surprised by the simple human decency of someone helping without being asked. "Sable Winters. Like the color black in heraldry," Bellamy had said, with a slight smile. "That's a cool name. Way better than being named after a Revolutionary War ship." They had stood together, and Bellamy had tilted her head slightly, studying Sable with open curiosity, rather than judgment. "You want to eat lunch together today? I usually sit outside on the courtyard benches when it's not raining. The cafeteria's too loud for me." Sable should have said no. Every instinct told her that letting someone get close would only mean bringing them into the line of fire, that Garrison would extend his campaign of harassment to anyone who associated with her. But something about Bellamy's easy kindness, the casual offer made without seeming to expect anything in return, had made Sable nod before she could stop herself. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, that would be nice." That lunch period had been the first time in 6 weeks that Sable had actually enjoyed being at school. Bellamy talked about her classes, her love of photography, her frustration with the school's outdated. When Sable and Bellamy were on their courtyard benches despite the November cold, wrapped in jackets and sharing a thermos of hot chocolate Bellamy had brought from home, Garrison and his crew had walked past, and Sable had felt their attention like a physical weight. "Hey, Bellamy," Garrison called out, his voice carrying false friendliness. "Didn't know you liked collecting strays. That one doesn't even have a collar." Bellamy had stiffened beside Sable, her jaw tightening. "Mind your own business, Garrison," she'd called back, her voice level but edged with steel. "Some of us have better things to do than harass people smaller than us." The air had changed in that moment. Garrison's expression had shifted from amused to cold, and Sable had known immediately that Bellamy had just painted a target on herself. "Careful, Crane," Garrison had said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "You might want to reconsider who you hang around with. Bad associations tend to rub off." After he and his crew had moved on, Sable had turned to Bellamy, her heart pounding. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "He's going to come after you now too." Bellamy had looked at her with surprise. "You think I care what Garrison Holt thinks? That guy's a coward who only feels big when he's making other people feel small." "Besides," she had added, bumping her shoulder gently against Sable's, "what are friends for, if not to stand up for each other?" The question had hit Sable harder than any of Garrison's shoves. She couldn't remember the last time someone had called her a friend, couldn't remember the last time anyone had chosen to stand beside her instead of stepping away. "I appreciate it," she had managed, her voice rough with emotion she didn't want to show. "But really, it's better if you stay out of it. He'll lose interest eventually if no one gives him reactions." "You've been giving him no reactions for weeks," Bellamy had pointed out. "Has he lost interest?" Sable hadn't had an answer for that. The following Monday, Garrison began targeting them both. In the cafeteria, his crew engineered a collision that sent Bellamy's lunch tray crashing to the floor, spaghetti and sauce splattering across her jeans and shoes. During passing period, someone knocked Bellamy's camera bag off her shoulder, sending her expensive equipment sliding across the hallway floor. Equipment Sable knew Bellamy had saved for months to buy. The incidents were calculated, designed to be deniable enough that teachers wouldn't intervene, but obvious enough that everyone knew who was responsible. Bellamy handled it with more grace than Sable would have expected, refusing to show fear or anger, simply cleaning up each mess and moving forward. But Sable saw the strain in her friend's expression, the tension in her shoulders, the way she started checking over her shoulder in the hallways, guilt gnawed at Sable constantly. This was her fault. Bellamy was suffering because of her, because she had been selfish enough to accept friendship when she should have remained alone. One evening after school, they were in the library working on homework, when Bellamy had suddenly closed her textbook and looked at Sable directly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Sable had felt her shoulders tense. "Okay." "Why do you let them treat you like that?" "I've watched you in gym class, Sable. You move like someone who knows how to move. And sometimes, when someone comes at you in the hallway, I see you start to react, like really react, but then you stop yourself, like you're holding something back." Sable's heart had hammered against her ribs. She should have deflected, should have made some excuse, but Bellamy's green eyes held nothing but genuine concern and curiosity. "If I told you," Sable had said slowly, "you'd probably think I was crazy." "Try me." So Sable had told her. Not everything, but enough. About her father, about growing up in a Krav Maga gym, about years of training in techniques designed for real combat rather than sport. About the promise she had made at his grave, about her determination not to become someone who solved problems with violence. She had spoken quietly, aware of other students in the library. Watching Bellamy's expression for signs of disbelief or mockery, she found neither. "So you could defend yourself," Bellamy had said when Sable finished. "You could end all of this anytime you wanted to. It's not that simple," Sable replied. "Once I start, where does it stop? I hurt Garrison. Then what? Assault charges, expulsion, getting my mom in legal trouble when we can barely afford rent. And beyond that..." She hesitated, searching for words. "My dad always said that knowing how to hurt people means you have a responsibility not to. That real strength isn't about winning fights. It's about avoiding them." Bellamy had been quiet for a long moment, processing. "I get it," she finally said. "But Sable, there's a difference between avoiding fights and letting people walk all over you. You're not even defending yourself verbally. You just take it, and people like Garrison interpret that as weakness, not strength." "I know," Sable had admitted. But the alternative scares me more. Because if I start fighting back, I don't know if I can stop at just enough. My dad's training. It's all about ending threats permanently. There's no half measure in Krav Maga. It's survive at all costs. And that's not who I want to be. Bellamy had reached across the table, squeezing Sable's hand briefly. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere, okay? Whatever happens." That conversation marked another shift. Sable found herself thinking about it during classes, during the long evenings in her empty apartment. Was she showing strength through restraint, or was she simply being a coward? All four of them, with that particular swagger that signaled something worse than usual was coming. "So we've been thinking," Garrison said, positioning himself directly in front of their bench, blocking their exit. "There's a dance next Friday, homecoming, and Bellamy, you're kind of cute under all that thrift store fashion. What do you say, want to go with a real man instead of this charity case?" Bellamy had stared at him with undisguised contempt. "I'd rather eat glass," she said flatly. Garrison's expression had hardened. "Wrong answer." He had reached forward fast, grabbing Bellamy's phone off the bench and holding it up above his head, out of reach. "Want it back? Come get it." Bellamy had stood, angry color flooding her cheeks. "Give it back, Garrison." "Make me." He tossed the phone to Brixton, who caught it with a laugh. Bellamy had moved toward him, but Brixton tossed it to Theron. They were playing keep-away like children, except these were grown men surrounding two smaller girls, and the game wasn't remotely funny. Sable had stood slowly, her mind calculating distances and positioning almost against her will. She was faster than any of them, could intercept the phone, could end this game in seconds. But doing so would require revealing capabilities she couldn't explain, would lead to questions and consequences she couldn't handle. "Just give it back," she heard herself say, her voice carefully flat. "This is childish." "Oh, look who's finally talking," Garrison said, stopping the game to focus on Sable. The mute found her voice. "What else you got hiding in there, charity case? Any other surprises?" The way he looked at her suggested he suspected something, that her slip in gym class had made him wonder. Before Sable could respond, Theron had thrown Bellamy's phone, not to another crew member, but hard against the brick wall of the building. It shattered on impact, pieces of glass and plastic scattering across the concrete. Bellamy had made a sound of pure distress. That phone represented months of saved wages from her coffee shop job, was her connection to her mother and brother, held all her photos and contacts. Sable had felt something crack inside her chest, felt the careful walls she had built start to crumble. She had taken a step toward Garrison without conscious decision, had felt her weight shifting to the balls of her feet, her guard starting to come up. For a fraction of a second, she was going to do it, going to drop him right there in the courtyard. Consequences be damned, but Bellamy's hand had caught her arm. "Don't," her friend had said quietly, firmly. "Sable, don't. He's not worth it." The moment had passed. Garrison and his crew had swaggered away, laughing, leaving Bellamy to gather the pieces of her destroyed phone, while Sable stood frozen, trembling with adrenaline and suppressed violence. That night, Sable had stayed awake until 3 in the morning, drilling techniques in her apartment's tiny living room, working through forms and combinations until her muscles burned and her mind quieted. She was losing control of the situation, losing control of herself. Something had to give, and soon. The 11th week arrived with temperatures dropping into the 30s, November settling into the kind of bone-deep cold that made Ohio winter's famous rain fell frequently, turning the school's athletic fields into mud pits, cancelling outdoor practices, forcing everyone into the overcrowded indoor spaces where Sable had less room to avoid confrontations. Bellamy had been quieter that week, the stress of everything showing in shadows under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that never quite relaxed. She had saved enough for a basic replacement phone, but the loss of all her photos and contacts weighed on her visibly. On Wednesday of that week, Sable had arrived at school to find obscene graffiti spray-painted across her locker, words that made her face burn with humiliation as other students passed by, some laughing, others averting their eyes in second-hand embarrassment. The custodian had cleaned it off during first period, but everyone had seen it by then, had taken photos that would circulate through social media for days. In English class, Mrs. Henderson had assigned a group project, and when Sable had approached a group to ask if she could join them, the students had exchanged uncomfortable glances before one boy said, "Sorry, we're full." Every group was suddenly full. She had completed the project alone. By Friday, Sable's control had worn thin enough that she could feel it fraying with every interaction, every whispered comment, every laugh at her expense. Her posture had changed without her conscious intent. Her shoulders were straighter now, her head higher, her gaze more direct. She moved through the hallways with less of a shuffle and more of a measured stride, her bag carried over one shoulder instead of clutched in front of her. Students noticed these subtle shifts, though most couldn't articulate what was different. Garrison noticed. That afternoon, when Sable and Bellamy were walking to the parking lot after school, Garrison had stepped into their path with Brixton and Theron flanking him. "You know what I figured out?" Garrison said, his eyes fixed on Sable with predatory intensity. "You're not actually shy or scared. There's something else going on, the way you move sometimes, the way you hold yourself when you think no one's watching. You're hiding something." Sable met his stare without flinching, felt the old her trying to assert control. "Lower your eyes, appear submissive, don't challenge," but couldn't quite make herself obey. "I'm not hiding anything," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "I just want to be left alone." "That's not going to happen," Garrison replied. "See, this is my school. These are my hallways, my cafeteria, my parking lot. Everyone here exists because I allow them to exist, and you're entertainment. You don't get to just opt out." "Watch me," Sable heard herself say, the words emerging before she could stop them. Bellamy had stiffened beside her, sensing the shift in tone, the danger in Sable's newfound verbal defiance. Garrison had laughed, but it wasn't his usual confident sound. There was an edge to it, a note of uncertainty. "Careful, Charity Case. You keep talking like that, someone might actually try to do something about your attitude. And then what? You going to fight back? You going to hit me?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'd love to see you try." For a long, tense moment, Sable and Garrison had stared at each other, something unspoken passing between them, his challenge and her silent promise that accepting it would be a mistake. Then Bellamy had touched Sable's arm gently. "Come on," she said. "Let's go." They had walked away, leaving Garrison standing in the parking lot, and Sable had known that the confrontation everyone had been building toward was no longer a question of if, but when. That weekend, Sable had returned to serious training for the first time in months. She couldn't go to a proper gym, membership was expensive, and questions would be asked about her background and training history, but she found a park with a heavy bag hanging from a covered pavilion structure, clearly maintained by someone who practiced there regularly. Saturday morning, before dawn, Sable had wrapped her hands carefully and worked the bag for 2 hours, drilling combinations her father had taught her, feeling muscle memory return with each strike. Jab, cross, hook, slip, slip, roll, teep to create distance, knees from the clinch, elbows for close work. The movement settled her mind and reminded her body of what it could do. Sunday afternoon, she met Bellamy at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory away from school. They sat in a quiet corner, steaming mugs between them, and Bellamy had studied Sable for a long moment before speaking. "Something's different about you," she said. "Since yesterday, since that confrontation with Garrison." "I'm tired of running," Sable admitted. "I'm tired of hiding. I feel like I'm betraying everything my dad taught me by letting people treat me like this. He trained me to be strong, to be capable, to never be a victim. And instead, I'm..." She gestured helplessly. "Whatever this is." "Your dad also taught you restraint," Bellamy reminded her gently. "You told me that's what he emphasized most, that knowing how to hurt people means having the responsibility not to." "I know, but there has to be a line, Bellamy, a point where restraint becomes cowardice, where not fighting back doesn't make you strong. It just makes you an enabler of cruelty." Sable wrapped her hands around her mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic. "I think I'm getting close to that line." "What happens when you cross it?" I don't know," Sable said honestly. "That's what scares me." They had talked for hours that afternoon, Bellamy asking careful questions about Sable's training, trying to understand exactly what her friend was capable of. Sable explaining concepts and techniques that must have sounded almost fictional to someone without that background. "So you could actually defend yourself against Garrison and his crew?" Bellamy had asked at one point. "Even though it's 4 of them and 1 of you. 4 untrained bullies against someone trained in Krav Maga?" Sable shrugged. "It wouldn't even be close, that's the problem. It wouldn't be a fight, it would be an assault charge waiting to happen." "Unless they attacked you first," Bellamy had pointed out. "Then it's self-defense." "Maybe, if I could prove I used appropriate force, but Garrison's dad has money and lawyers. Mine has..." Sable trailed off, not wanting to articulate the poverty and powerlessness that characterized her life. "We don't have anything. I can't risk legal trouble." "So you're trapped," Bellamy had said softly. "Damned if you do, damned if you don't." Basically. But as Sable walked home that evening through streets darkening into early winter night, she found herself thinking about choice and consequence in new ways. Her father had taught her that real warriors chose their battles carefully, fought only when necessary, used minimum force to resolve maximum threat. Maybe the question wasn't whether to fight back, but when and how. Maybe there was a version of events where she defended herself without destroying anyone, where she showed strength without cruelty, where she proved that mercy and power could coexist. The 12th week began with an unusual warmth on Monday morning. Temperatures climbing into the 50s, the November sky clear and bright after days of grey overcast. Sable walked into Lincoln High, with her shoulders squared and her head high, done with pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had spent the weekend planning, thinking through scenarios, preparing herself mentally for what she had decided would be her final week of passive acceptance. If Garrison came at her again, she would set boundaries verbally. If he crossed those boundaries physically, she would defend herself appropriately, no more, no less. The change in Sable's demeanor was immediate and obvious. She moved through the hallways with fluid confidence, her bag slung over one shoulder, her gaze direct rather than downcast. When Theron attempted to knock her books away during passing period, Sable had simply adjusted her grip at the last second, maintaining control, then looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Really?" she had said, her tone suggesting disappointment rather than fear. "That's the best you've got?" The incident had drawn attention from nearby students, and Theron had colored with embarrassment, uncertain how to respond to mockery from someone who had been silent and passive for months. He had muttered something under his breath and walked away, and Sable had continued to class with the satisfied sense that dynamics were shifting. At lunch, when Garrison's crew approached the courtyard benches where Sable and Bellamy sat, Sable had stood before they could begin their usual harassment. "Here's how this is going to work," she said clearly, her voice carrying to the small crowd of students who had paused to watch what everyone sensed was becoming a different kind of confrontation. "You're going to leave us alone. Today, tomorrow, every day after. You're going to find someone else to entertain you, or better yet, find something productive to do with your time." Garrison had stared at her with genuine surprise before his expression shifted to anger. "You think you can talk to me like that?" "I just did." Sable kept her voice level, calm, but there was steel underneath that hadn't been present before. "Walk away, Garrison. This doesn't end well for you." "Is that a threat?" Brixton had stepped forward, trying to intimidate with his size. "You threatening him?" "It's a promise," Sable replied, meeting Brixton's stare without flinching. "You come at me again. You won't like what happens." The confrontation had ended with Garrison laughing it off, making comments about Sable finally growing a spine. But something had shifted in his eyes, uncertainty mixed with anger, the dangerous combination of a bully who sensed their power slipping. As he and his crew walked away, Bellamy had grabbed Sable's arm. "That was amazing," she breathed. "But Sable, you just challenged him directly. He has to respond now or lose face." "I know," Sable said. "I'm counting on it. Because the next time he comes at me, it's going to be public and obvious and witnessed by everyone. And then it's self-defense, clear and simple." "You're planning this," Bellamy realized. "You're setting him up." "I'm giving him a choice," Sable corrected. "He can walk away and leave us alone, or he can escalate. That's on him." But as the week progressed, it became clear that Garrison would choose escalation. The harassment intensified beyond anything that had come before. Crude photoshopped images appeared on social media showing Sable and Bellamy in compromising situations. Anonymous accounts sent threatening messages. Someone slashed Sable's bicycle tires where she kept it chained behind the school. During gym class, Brixton had accidentally elbowed Sable in the face, hard enough to bloody her nose again. And when she had simply stood there, blood streaming down her chin, staring at him without reaction or tears, he had actually taken a step backward. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon, when the rain that had been threatening all week finally arrived. Heavy November rain that turned the athletic fields into churning mud, that sent water streaming across parking lots and walkways, that made everyone hurry between buildings with hunched shoulders and inadequate jackets. Bellamy had texted Sable during last period, "Meet me at my car after school, need to talk about something important." Sable had packed her bag slowly after the final bell, letting the rush of students clear, then made her way toward the student parking lot through the driving rain. The lot was mostly empty by the time she arrived, most students having run for their cars to escape the weather. She spotted Bellamy standing beside her mother's sedan near the back of the lot and started walking in that direction, then registered the 4 figures that had appeared from between rows of parked vehicles, blocking her path. Garrison, Brixton, Theron, and Judson arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, their expensive athletic gear soaked through by rain. Garrison held his phone up, clearly recording video. "So here's what's going to happen," he called out, his voice raised over the sound of rain. "You've been talking tough all week, Charity Case. Time to back up that mouth. You and Bellamy are going to get on your knees right here in the mud, and you're going to apologize to me properly for disrespecting me in front of the whole school." Sable had stopped walking, her heart rate steady, her mind clicking into the cold tactical assessment her father had drilled into her since childhood. 4 opponents, all larger but untrained. She was smaller, faster, better positioned. Rain provided both cover and complication. Footing would be unstable. Multiple witnesses with phones out now, students who had heard the confrontation and come to watch. Bellamy standing by her car, expression frightened but determined. "No," Sable said simply, clearly. "Then we'll make you," Garrison replied. And he had started walking toward her, Brixton and Theron moving to flank him, positioning to surround Sable between them and Bellamy. This was it. The moment Sable had known was coming, the confrontation that would either end the harassment or escalate everything beyond return. "Last chance to walk away," Sable called out, her voice carrying across the parking lot to where at least 20 students had now gathered, all with phones raised, all recording. "All of you, just leave." "Make us," Garrison said, and he had shoved her, both hands against her shoulders, hard enough that anyone else would have stumbled backward or fallen. But Sable had already shifted her weight to her back foot, had braced for the impact, and instead of falling, she had simply rocked slightly and then reset her stance. The look of surprise on Garrison's face would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "Wrong choice," Sable said quietly, and then she had moved her father's training, activated like muscle memory, encoded too deep to forget. When Brixton rushed in from the right, throwing a wild haymaker punch, Sable had slipped the strike with a minimal head movement, stepped offline to create an angle, and delivered a short, right hand protecting her jaw, elbows in tight, weight distributed evenly on the balls of her feet. It was a picture-perfect kickboxing stance, unmistakable in its competence to anyone who knew what they were looking at. "Or you can leave. Your choice." For a moment, Garrison had looked like he might actually walk away. Then Judson, trying to help or perhaps just panicking, had rushed Sable from behind, attempting a tackle. But Sable had sensed the movement, footsteps splashing through puddles, breathing, the displacement of air, and spun to meet him. She caught his reaching arms, used his momentum to off-balance him, and then simply stepped aside in a manner that looked almost like a dance move, letting Judson's charge carry him past her into the mud, where he slipped and went down face first. That left only Garrison, and Sable had turned to face him fully, maintaining her guard, waiting. The rain plastered her hair to her skull, ran down her face, soaked through her cheap jacket and worn jeans, but she stood steady and balanced, her breathing controlled, her eyes locked on Garrison with the kind of focus that came from years of sparring against adults who wouldn't go easy, from hours of drilling until movements became automatic, from a childhood spent learning that hesitation meant defeat. "How?" Garrison had asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. "How did you... What are you?" "Someone you should have left alone," Sable replied. Then, because she needed to make this absolutely clear, needed to ensure that everyone watching understood what they were seeing, she had added, "My father was a military combat instructor. I've been training in Krav Maga and kickboxing since I was 6 years old. I could have defended myself at any point during the past 3 months. I chose not to because I don't want to hurt people. I just wanted to be left alone." "You lied," Garrison said, and there was anger in his voice now, the anger of someone realizing they had been played, manipulated, made to look foolish. "You let me think you were helpless." "I am helpless," Sable said quietly, "against lawyers and money and a system that protects people like you, but in a straight fight." She shook her head slightly. "That's different. That's the one place where all your father's money and all your social status means nothing." Garrison's jaw had tightened, his pride clearly warring with his growing understanding that continuing this confrontation would end very badly for him. Behind Sable, Brixton was still on his knees in the mud, struggling to breathe normally. Theron was climbing slowly to his feet, One hand pressed to his back where he had landed, Judson remained face down in a puddle, either knocked out or simply too stunned to move. "This isn't over," Garrison had finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Sable replied firmly. "It's over right now, Garrison. You're going to walk away. You're going to leave me and Bellamy alone. You're going to stop harassing other students who can't defend themselves. And if you don't, if you come at me again, or at anyone I care about, then next time I won't be so gentle." Gentle. Garrison had looked at his crew, scattered in the mud around them. "You call this gentle? Brixton will be sore for a couple days, but he's not injured. Theron might have a bruised tailbone, but nothing's broken. Judson just got embarrassed and muddy. If I wanted to hurt any of you, you'd know the difference." Sable lowered her hands, relaxing her guard slightly, but maintaining readiness. "I used minimum force to stop a threat. That's called restraint. That's the difference between defending yourself and being a bully." The rain had continued falling, running down faces and soaking clothes, creating a grey curtain that somehow made the scene more dramatic. The gathered crowd of students continued filming, phones held high to capture every moment someone in the crowd had shouted, "Holy shit! Did you see that?" Another voice, "She dropped all three of them in like 5 seconds." The murmur of excited conversation grew, students processing what they had witnessed, the complete inversion of expected power dynamics. Garrison had stood there for another long moment, and Sable had seen the exact instant when his ego collapsed under the weight of reality. His shoulders had slumped slightly, his jaw unclenched, and something like shame had crossed his expression. Without another word, he had turned and walked toward his truck, leaving his crew to pick themselves up from the mud on their own. Brixton and Theron had followed after a moment's hesitation, shooting backward glances at Sable that mixed fear with grudging respect. Only Judson had needed help standing. One of the watching students eventually stepping forward to offer a hand. Sable had turned to find Bellamy standing frozen by her car, eyes wide, one hand pressed to her mouth. Their gazes met across the rain-soaked parking lot, and Sable had felt a moment of pure fear, not of Garrison or physical harm, but of losing the only real friend she had made in years, of seeing disgust or fear in Bellamy's eyes. But instead, Bellamy had lowered her hand, revealing a shaky smile. "That," she had called out, "was the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life." The tension had broken like a released breath. Sable felt her knees weaken slightly with aftermath adrenaline, felt her hands begin to shake with the delayed reaction her training had suppressed during the confrontation. She walked toward Bellamy on legs that felt uncertain, and when she reached her friend, Bellamy had pulled her into a fierce hug that pressed their soaked clothes together. "Are you okay?" Bellamy asked quietly. "Really okay?" "I don't know," Sable admitted against her friend's shoulder. "I think so. I didn't want to do that. I really didn't want to." Didn't have to suppress her natural reactions and movements. She could just be. The consequences arrived swiftly. By that evening, multiple videos of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, even YouTube. Students who had witnessed the fight posted their footage with captions ranging from "Bully gets wrecked" to "Lincoln High parking lot fight must watch," to more thoughtful commentary about bullying and self-defense. The videos showed everything clearly: Garrison's verbal harassment, his physical shove that initiated contact, Sable's controlled response that neutralized 3 opponents in seconds, her measured warning and offer to let them walk away, the way she maintained discipline and restraint, even in the middle of physical confrontation. Sable's phone, which she had left in her locker during the incident, was full of messages when she retrieved it later that evening. Some were supportive, praising her for standing up to Garrison. Others were accusatory, calling her violent or dangerous. A few were from people she barely knew, suddenly wanting to be friends now that she had proven herself. She ignored most of them, responding only to Bellamy's concerned texts and one message from a girl she recognized from her English class. "Thank you." Garrison did something similar to me last year, and I was too scared to fight back. Seeing you defend yourself made me feel like maybe I could have. Maybe next time I will. That message made Sable cry, sitting alone in her apartment's tiny bedroom while her mother worked a night shift. Not from sadness or regret, but from the recognition that her choice to finally stand up had rippled outward in ways she hadn't anticipated, that other victims of harassment might find courage in her example. It was what her father had always taught, that standing up to bullies wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about demonstrating to others that bullies could be beaten, that strength and skill could overcome size and numbers and social status. On Monday morning, Sable had been called to the principal's office before first period. She walked through hallways that felt different now, students parting to let her pass, whispered conversations following in her wake. Some of the whispers were fearful. She was the girl who had dropped 3 guys in seconds, who moved like a trained fighter, who might be dangerous. But more of them were respectful, even admiring. She heard phrases like, stood up for herself, and finally someone put Garrison in his place. And did you see how controlled she was? Principal Marshfield was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had overseen Lincoln High for the past decade with the weary resignation of someone who had seen every possible student conflict. He sat behind his desk in an office decorated with sports trophies and academic awards and gestured for Sable to take one of the chairs across from him. The school resource officer stood in the corner, Officer Davis, who Sable recognized from the parking lot surveillance footage review after Bellamy's tires were slashed. "Ms. Winters," Principal Marshfield began, "I'm sure you know why you're here." "The parking lot incident on Friday," Sable replied calmly. "Yes, sir. Multiple students have come forward with video evidence of a physical altercation between you and several other students. I've reviewed that footage myself. What I see is you engaging in violence against 3 students." "Self-defense," Sable interrupted quietly, but firmly. "Garrison Holt initiated physical contact by shoving me. I responded with minimal force necessary to stop the threat. That's textbook self-defense, and the video evidence supports that." "You put 3 students on the ground in a matter of seconds," the principal said. "That suggests training and capability far beyond what would be expected from a normal student." "I do have training," Sable acknowledged. "My father was a military combat instructor. He taught me Krav Maga and kickboxing from a young age. But having training doesn't negate my right to defend myself when physically attacked." Officer Davis had stepped forward from his corner. "What Ms. Winters says is accurate, Principal Marshfield. I've reviewed all available footage from multiple angles. Garrison Holt clearly initiated physical contact with aggressive intent. Ms. Winters defended herself with a level of control that actually demonstrates remarkable restraint. Given her apparent skill level, she could have inflicted serious injury. She chose not to." "That's beside the point," Principal Marshfield said, though he sounded less certain now. "We have a zero-tolerance policy regarding violence on school property." "Then you should be having this conversation with Garrison Holt," Sable said, her voice hardening slightly. "Because I've been dealing with his violence for 3 months. Physical intimidation, property destruction, harassment, stalking, threats. I reported some of it, other students reported more of it, and nothing was done. So when he finally escalated to actual assault, I defended myself, and now I'm the one being called into your office." The principal had shifted uncomfortably. There are proper channels for handling these situations. I tried the proper channels. Sable interrupted again. They failed. Teachers looked the other way. Administrators worried more about the school's reputation than student safety. And when Garrison's crew slashed my friend's tires in your parking lot, the investigation went nowhere, despite clear evidence. So forgive me if I don't have a lot of faith in proper channels. There had been a long silence in the office, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows, another November storm moving through. Finally, Officer Davis spoke again. With respect, Principal Marshfield, I think Miss Winters has a point. We have documentation of multiple complaints about Garrison Holt's behavior toward her and other students. If this goes to any formal hearing, that history will come up, along with video evidence that clearly shows self-defense. The school's liability in that scenario would be significant. Principal Marshfield had rubbed his temples wearily. What is it you expect me to do, Ms. Winters? Nothing, Sable said. I don't expect you to do anything. I defended myself because no one else would protect me. And now Garrison and his crew know that I can and will defend myself if necessary. That's enough. It sets a dangerous precedent. The precedent already existed, Sable said quietly. Bullies can torment victims for months without consequence. The only new precedent is that some victims might actually fight back. And honestly, Principal Marshfield, that's not such a bad message to send. She had been dismissed after extracting a promise that she would not initiate any further confrontations. Sable had agreed readily. She had no interest in initiating anything, had never wanted confrontation in the first place. As she left the office and walked back into the main hallway, she found Bellamy waiting on a bench near the administration wing. Her friend jumped up immediately. "What happened? Are you expelled?" "No," Sable said, managing a slight smile. "He threatened to suspend me if there are any more incidents, but Officer Davis pointed out that it was clear self-defense. I think I'm basically on probation. They'll be watching me closely, but I'm not in formal trouble. And Garrison? Don't know. I assume he's having a similar conversation, but with his dad's money and lawyers, probably getting even less of a consequence than I did." Sable had been surprised by how little bitterness she felt about that. A few days ago, the injustice would have consumed her. Now it seemed almost irrelevant. Garrison's social power had been broken in that parking lot, witnessed and recorded by dozens of his peers. No amount of money or legal maneuvering could rebuild the reputation he had lost when he was publicly defeated by someone half his size. The school day proceeded strangely. Sable moved through her classes in a bubble of whispered attention and sideways glances. Some students avoided her entirely, seemingly nervous about the violence she had displayed. Others nodded respectfully as she passed, or offered quiet words of support. In English class, Mrs. Henderson had asked Sable to stay after the bell, and Sable had braced for another lecture about proper behavior and using appropriate channels. Instead, the teacher had simply said, "I'm sorry. I saw what was happening and I didn't do enough to stop it. That was cowardly of me, and you deserved better." The apology had been so unexpected that Sable hadn't known how to respond at first. "Thank you," she finally managed. "That means a lot. You showed more courage on Friday than I've shown in my entire..." The parking lot. It wasn't just about her standing up to Garrison. It was about demonstrating to an entire school full of students that victims weren't powerless, that bullies could be defeated, that choosing to fight back didn't make you a bad person if you did it for the right reasons and with appropriate restraint. By Tuesday, the immediate shock had faded into a new normal. Garrison and his crew were notably absent from school, and rumors spread about suspensions and mandatory counseling sessions. Sable suspected their absences had more to do with humiliation than official punishment. How could they show their faces after being so publicly defeated? But their absence created breathing room, a sense of relief that rippled through the school's social fabric. Students who had been targets of harassment found themselves able to move through hallways without fear. Groups that had been intimidated into silence began speaking up. The toxic culture Garrison had enforced through intimidation was cracking like ice in spring thaw. Bellamy had spent Tuesday morning showing Sable the social media response to the parking lot videos. "You're kind of famous," she said, scrolling through comments on her phone. Not just at Lincoln High, but like everywhere. People are sharing the videos with hashtags like #stand up for yourself and #strength with mercy. There are think pieces being written about bullying and self-defense. Someone made a compilation video showing how controlled and precise your movements were, breaking down the techniques frame by frame. Sable had watched one of those breakdown videos with fascination tinged with discomfort. A martial arts instructor somewhere had analyzed her response in technical detail. Notice how she never overcommits to any strike, always maintains her base, keeps her hands up even when moving. This is someone with years of high-level training. But what's most impressive is her restraint. She could have thrown elbows to the face, knees to the head, used any number of techniques that would cause serious damage. Instead, she uses push kicks, sweeps, and throws that neutralize the threat without permanent injury. This is what self-defense actually looks like. "It's weird seeing myself analyzed like that," Sable admitted, "like I'm some kind of character instead of just a person who didn't want to get bullied anymore." "You're both," Bellamy said. "You're Sable, my friend, who likes bad horror movies and puts way too much hot sauce on everything. But you're also this symbol now of standing up for yourself, of being strong without being cruel. You can't control that people are going to see the video and take their own meaning from it." On Wednesday afternoon, Sable had been approached by Coach Ramirez, who oversaw the school's small self-defense club. "Ms. Winters," he said after classes ended, catching up with her in the hallway, "I reviewed footage from Friday's incident. You have legitimate training. I understand what kind of person I've been." "What changed?" Sable asked, closing her locker and finally turning to face him. "Was it getting embarrassed in front of the whole school? Because if that's all it took to give you a conscience, then you didn't learn the right lesson." Garrison flinched at that, but didn't back down. "It wasn't about being embarrassed. It was about—" He struggled for words. "It was about realizing that I'd been picking on someone who could have destroyed me at any point, but chose not to. You showed mercy when I wouldn't have, when I didn't deserve it. That's what got through to me." "I didn't show mercy to teach you a lesson," Sable said quietly. "I showed mercy because becoming a bully myself, becoming someone who uses their strength to hurt people, that would have meant betraying everything I believe in. It would have meant betraying my father's memory." "I know, but it taught me something anyway." Garrison looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. "My dad, he's always pushing me to dominate, to never show weakness, to prove I'm better than everyone else. And I bought into it because it's easier to be the one doing the intimidating than to admit you're scared. Scared you're not good enough. Scared you'll fail. Scared that without the fear and respect you get from bullying, no one would actually like you." "Fear isn't respect," Sable said, "and the people who only liked you because you were a bully weren't really your friends." "I'm figuring that out." Garrison looked up again, meeting her eyes with visible effort. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm going to be different. Not because I got caught or humiliated, but because you showed me there's another way to be strong." Sable had studied him for a long moment, searching for sincerity versus performance. She had spent enough time being victimized to recognize manipulation, and while Garrison's words might have been rehearsed, the shame and uncertainty in his expression seemed genuine. "Here's what I'll say," she finally responded. "Everyone deserves a chance to change if they're willing to do the work. Real change means more than just apologizing. It means actively making different choices every single day. It means standing up when you see other people being bullied instead of participating or looking away. It means using whatever privilege and influence you have to make things better instead of worse." "I can do that," Garrison said. "I want to do that." "Then prove it," Sable said simply. "Not to me. I don't need anything from you except to be left alone. Prove it to everyone else you've hurt. Prove it to the next kid who shows up here scared and vulnerable. Be the person who makes them feel safer instead of more afraid." Garrison had nodded slowly, and then without another word, he had turned and walked away, leaving Sable standing at her locker processing the surreal experience of receiving an apology from someone who had made her life hell for months. She didn't trust it entirely, people didn't change overnight, and Garrison's history of cruelty wasn't erased by one conversation. But it was a start, and Sable recognized that demanding perfection from someone trying to grow was its own form of cruelty. That evening, Bellamy came over to Sable's apartment, and they ordered pizza and watched terrible movies and talked about everything except bullying and fighting and the viral videos that continued spreading across social media. It felt normal in the best possible way. Two friends spending time together without the weight of fear or anticipated harassment hanging over them. Bellamy talked about her photography projects and her college plans. Sable shared stories about her father, about growing up in a gym, about the philosophy behind self-defense that emphasized avoiding conflict whenever possible. "You know what I realized," Bellamy said around midnight as they shared a bowl of popcorn on Sable's worn couch. "You spent 3 months being terrified about becoming violent, about losing control and turning into someone dangerous. But when it actually happened, when you actually had to defend yourself, you were more in control than anyone I've ever seen. You were never in danger of becoming a monster, Sable. That was never going to happen." "I didn't know that," Sable admitted. "That was the scary part, not knowing if I could stop once I started." "But you did stop. You stopped exactly when you needed to, used exactly as much force as necessary, and then showed mercy when you could have done so much worse. That's not someone who's dangerous. That's someone who has incredible self-control." The observation settled something inside Sable that had been churning since the parking lot confrontation. Bellamy was right. She had been so afraid of losing control, of becoming someone who solved problems with violence, that she hadn't recognized her own discipline, the years of training that had taught her not just how to fight, but when and why, and how much her father's lessons had been absorbed more deeply than she realized. The following week brought continued adjustment to the new reality at Lincoln High Garrison, and his former crew existed in separate orbits now. Brixton and Theron having apparently decided that loyalty to someone who had led them into public humiliation wasn't worth maintaining. They still moved through the school with residual arrogance, but it was hollow now, and most students saw through it. Judson had actually approached Sable during study hall to mutter an awkward apology, explaining that he had only followed Garrison out of fear, that he had never actually wanted to hurt anyone. Sable had accepted the apology with a nod, not quite forgiving, but willing to let it go. More significantly, the culture at Lincoln High was shifting in small but noticeable ways. Students who had been silent witnesses to bullying began speaking up when they saw harassment starting. Teachers seemed more willing to intervene in conflicts. perhaps made uncomfortable by the recognition that their previous inaction had contributed to the parking lot incident. The administration sent out a memo about their renewed commitment to student safety and zero tolerance for harassment, words that rang somewhat hollow given their historical failures, but at least suggested awareness that change was needed. Sable had started helping Coach Ramirez with the self-defense program on Thursday afternoons. The program had doubled in attendance after the parking lot videos went viral, filled with students who wanted to learn how to protect themselves. Sable taught them basic stances and awareness, emphasized that the goal was never to fight, but to create opportunities to escape, stressed that physical techniques were the last resort after verbal boundary setting and environmental awareness failed. She found unexpected satisfaction in teaching, in passing on her father's philosophy along with his techniques, in watching students gain confidence not from aggression but from knowledge. During one of these sessions, a freshman boy named Marcus, one of the common names Sable had been told to avoid but which fit him perfectly, had asked the question everyone was probably wondering: if you knew how to fight this whole time, why didn't you do something earlier? Why let them bully you for so long? Sable had paused her demonstration to address the class fully. Because knowing how to hurt people comes with the responsibility not to. My father taught me that having these skills means you have to be even more careful about when and how you use them. I tried every other option first, ignoring the harassment, reporting to administrators, avoiding confrontations. I only defended myself physically when I was literally out of options, when someone put their hands on me in a way that left no choice. But weren't you scared? Another student asked, during those months when they were bullying you? Terrified, Sable admitted. Not scared of getting hurt in a fight, scared of losing control, of doing permanent damage to someone, of betraying the values my father taught me, of legal consequences my family couldn't afford. The fear wasn't about whether I could defend myself. The fear was about what defending myself might turn me into. But it didn't turn you into anything bad, the first student said. You defended yourself, and you were still a good person. You showed mercy. That's the lesson I want you all to learn, Sable said. Self-defense isn't about revenge or domination or proving you're tough. It's about protecting yourself with the minimum force necessary to stop a threat. And the goal is always to avoid physical confrontation. If at all possible, violence should be the absolute last option, not the first. These sessions became a highlight of Sable's weeks, a space where she could transform something painful into something productive, where her father's training could serve a purpose beyond just survival. Students in the program treated her with respect, but not fear, understanding that her skills were matched by discipline and restraint. She was proving, day by day, that being capable of violence didn't make you violent, that strength and kindness could coexist. 3 weeks after the parking lot incident, during a cold December morning when frost covered the windows and students huddled in their winter coats, Sable witnessed a situation that reminded her why her choice to fight back had mattered. She was at her locker before first period when she heard a commotion down the hallway, raised voices, laughter with a cruel edge. The particular sound of social dynamics turned weaponized. Turning, she saw a small cluster of students surrounding a girl Sable recognized as a freshman, someone new and obviously struggling to fit in. 2 boys were tossing her backpack between them while she pleaded for them to stop, her face red with humiliation and tears threatening to spill. Sable's first instinct was to intervene directly, but she checked herself. Charging in to physically dominate the situation would just reinforce the might-makes-right dynamic she was trying to break. Instead, She walked over calmly, positioning herself beside the freshman girl, and simply said in a voice loud enough to carry, "Give her the backpack." The two boys, juniors who Sable vaguely recognized from the hallways, had frozen. One of them, the one holding the backpack, had tried to laugh it off. "Just having some fun, no big deal." "It's a big deal to her," Sable said, nodding toward the freshman whose tears were now falling freely. "And it's going to be a big deal to you if you don't give it back right now." "What are you going to do about it?" the second boy challenged, but his voice lacked conviction. Everyone at Lincoln High knew who Sable was now, knew what she was capable of, knew that challenging her was a losing proposition. "Nothing," Sable said calmly, "because you're going to make the right choice. You're going to give her the backpack, apologize, and walk away. And then you're going to think really hard about whether you want to be remembered as the kind of person who picks on people smaller than them, or whether you want to be better than that." The first boy had looked at the backpack, then at Sable, then at the small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. Whatever he saw in Sable's steady gaze convinced him. He handed the backpack to the freshman with a muttered, "Sorry," and he and his friend had hurried away, unwilling to test whether Sable's calm demeanor would hold. If they pushed further, Sable had turned to the freshman girl, who was clutching her backpack and wiping tears with her sleeve. "You okay?" No longer suppressing her personality to avoid attention. The transformation wasn't just external. Internally, Sable had reconciled the different parts of herself. The trained fighter and the person who valued peace. The daughter, honoring her father's memory, and the young woman forging her own path. She understood now that strength came in many forms. The strength to endure, the strength to stand up, the strength to show mercy, the strength to help others find their own courage. All of these were valid, all were necessary, and navigating between them required judgment and wisdom that couldn't be taught in any gym. One afternoon in late December, Sable had been leaving the school building after helping with the self-defense program when she encountered Garrison in the near-empty parking lot. They hadn't spoken since his apology weeks earlier, had simply coexisted in the same school with careful mutual distance. But now he was leaning against his expensive truck, clearly waiting for someone, and their eyes met across the intervening space. Sable had paused, uncertain whether to engage or simply walk past. But Garrison had straightened, walked over with hands visible and non-threatening, stopping several feet away to maintain appropriate distance. "I wanted to tell you something," he said without preamble. "Last week there was a sophomore getting harassed by some guys from my old crowd, and I stopped it, told them to leave the kid alone. That there were better ways to spend their time. They backed off." "That's good," Sable said, meaning it. "That's the kind of change that matters." "It felt weird," Garrison admitted, "being the one who stops harassment instead of causes it. But also, I don't know, it felt better somehow, like I was actually worth something instead of just being the guy everyone was afraid of." "Fear and respect are different things," Sable said, echoing what she had told him before. "You're figuring that out." "I'm trying." Garrison had looked uncomfortable but determined. "My therapist, my dad finally got me into therapy after everything happened. She says I have a lot of work to do on myself. Says I used bullying as a way to feel powerful because I felt powerless at home with my dad's expectations and pressure. Which sounds like psychology bullshit, but is probably true." "Probably," Sable agreed, "but understanding why you did something doesn't excuse it. The work is in choosing to be different going forward." "I know." Garrison hesitated, then added, "I don't expect us to be friends or anything, but I wanted you to know that what you did, standing up for yourself while still showing restraint, it changed something in me, made me realize there was another way to be." "Good," Sable said simply. "Keep being that way." They had parted then, Garrison back to his truck, and Sable toward the bus stop, and Sable felt a sense of completion. She hadn't needed Garrison's transformation for her own healing, but seeing it unfold validated her choice to show mercy instead of vengeance. Violence begat violence, but sometimes mercy could break those cycles, could plant seeds of change in unlikely soil. The last day before winter break arrived, with freezing temperatures and a light snowfall that transformed Lincoln High's campus into something almost beautiful. Sable walked through hallways decorated with paper snowflakes and holiday lights, surrounded by the excited chatter of students anticipating 2 weeks away from school. She stopped at her locker to clear out accumulated papers and books, planning to carry home only what she needed for break. Bellamy had appeared at her elbow, moving with the comfortable familiarity of genuine friendship. "Ready for freedom?" she asked. "So ready," Sable admitted. 2 weeks of sleeping late, no homework, no social dynamics to navigate. It sounds like paradise. "You want to do something over break? Maybe catch a movie or explore that vintage market downtown? I know we both need some normal teenager time after everything this semester." "Definitely," Sable said, closing her locker with a decisive clang. As they walked toward the exit together, they passed small groups of students who greeted them with genuine warmth. A nod from Marcus, a wave from Petra, friendly hellos from students whose names Sable had finally learned. They passed Garrison too, who was standing with a different, smaller group. In the parking lot confrontation, she had defended herself with minimum necessary force, had shown mercy when revenge would have been easier, had refused to become a bully even when she had every justification to hurt people who had hurt her. That restraint, that mercy, that refusal to let cruelty make her cruel, those were her father's true legacy, and she had honored it perfectly. The video from the parking lot continued circulating online, viewed millions of times, dissected and discussed and used as a teaching tool about self-defense and bullying and restraint. Sable didn't watch it anymore, didn't read the comments or follow the debates about whether she'd been justified or had used excessive force or should be held up as a hero or an example of violence breeding violence. She had made her choice in that moment, had acted according to her training and her values, and the court of public opinion was irrelevant to her own understanding of what had transpired. What mattered was that she could walk through school without fear now. What mattered was that other students had found their courage. What mattered was that Garrison was trying to be better, that Brixton and Theron had learned there were consequences to cruelty, that every student who had witnessed the confrontation had seen that bullies could be defeated without the victor becoming a monster. These were the real outcomes, the ones that couldn't be captured in viral videos or social media debates. Winter break passed in a blur of snow and holiday lights, and time spent with Bellamy, exploring coffee shops and vintage stores, and all the normal teenager activities that had seemed impossible during the dark months of autumn. Sable's mother took a few days off from her double shifts, and they decorated their tiny apartment and watched old movies and talked about the future with more hope than they had felt in years. The financial situation remained precarious, but something about surviving the past semester made other challenges feel more manageable. When school resumed in January, Sable returned to Lincoln High with a confidence that was neither arrogant nor fragile. She moved through hallways with easy awareness, greeted friends with genuine warmth, participated in classes without the constant background fear that had colored her first months at the school. The self-defense program continued growing, and Coach Ramirez officially made Sable an assistant instructor, a position that came with a small stipend that helped with family finances and gave her something to put on college applications. One afternoon in late January, during a self-defense session, a new student asked Sable the question that everyone ultimately wondered. Do you regret it, fighting back that day? Sable had paused, rolled her shoulders, considered her answer carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system failed badly enough that physical confrontation became the only option. I regret every moment of harassment that led up to it, and I wish it had never happened. She met the student's eyes directly. But do I regret defending myself? No, I don't, because staying passive wasn't keeping me safe. It was just teaching everyone that I could be victimized without consequence. Sometimes you have to draw a line. Sometimes you have to stand up, even if standing up is scary and complicated and comes with costs. But how did you know it was the right time? Another student asked, how did you know when to stop being passive and start defending yourself? When all other options were exhausted, Sable said, when reporting to adults didn't work, when ignoring the harassment didn't stop it, when trying to be invisible didn't keep me safe, when the bullying extended to hurting my friend, when someone physically put their hands on me in an aggressive way, that's when I knew I was out of choices, that continued passivity wouldn't make things better. And the mercy part, the first student pressed, how did you stop when you could have kept going? Because revenge wasn't my goal, Sable replied simply. My goal was to stop being victimized once that was accomplished. Once they were no longer a threat, continuing to hurt them would have made me the aggressor, would have made me just another bully with better skills. My father taught me that real warriors know when to fight and when to stop fighting. That's the discipline that matters. These conversations became part of the fabric of Sable's weeks, teaching her as much as they taught her students. She was learning that her story wasn't just her own, that it resonated with every person who had ever felt powerless, who had ever been victimized and told to handle it through official channels that didn't work, who had ever wondered if defending yourself made you as bad as your attackers. The answer she kept coming back to was nuanced and difficult. Self-defense was morally justified, but it came with the responsibility to use only necessary force, to stop when the threat ended, to never let righteous defense become unjust revenge. By February, the parking lot incident had faded from daily conversation at Lincoln High, replaced by new dramas and concerns, as always happened in the constant churn of school social dynamics. But the changes it had catalyzed remained. Students were more willing to intervene when they witnessed harassment. Teachers were more attentive to bullying dynamics. The administration had actually implemented meaningful anti-bullying policies with real consequences. And Garrison Holt, once the undisputed king of Lincoln High's social hierarchy, had become a genuinely better person. Not perfect, still working through issues with therapy and genuine effort, but no longer the predator he had been. One day in March, when spring was beginning to assert itself and snow was melting into muddy patches across the athletic fields, Sable found herself back in the parking lot where everything had changed. She stood near the space where she had defended herself, where mud puddles had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor to example. The ground was different now, thawed and drying, showing no trace of that November afternoon, but Sable could still see it in her mind. Garrison's crew surrounding her, the rain falling, the moment she had finally stopped running and stood her ground. "You okay?" Bellamy's voice broke her reverie. Her friend had walked up beside her, following Sable's gaze across the parking lot. "Yeah," Sable said, meaning it, just remembering. "It feels like it happened a lifetime ago." "In some ways it did," Bellamy said. "You're not the same person you were that day. Hell, I'm not the same person. This whole school isn't the same." "Is that good or bad?" "It's good," Bellamy said firmly. "It's definitely good. This place was toxic before, and everyone just accepted it because they didn't think it could change. You proved it could. They had walked together back toward the school building, passing students who greeted them warmly, no longer treating Sable as a curiosity or a threat, but simply as another member of the community. As they walked, Sable found herself thinking about the full circle she had traveled. From her father's gym as a child, learning to fight, through his death and her promise to avoid violence, through months of being victimized, to the moment she finally defended herself, to the aftermath where she had learned that strength and mercy could coexist. All of it had led her here, to this March afternoon, walking beside her best friend through a school where she finally felt safe, where she had found her place, not by being invisible, but by being fully herself. Trained fighter and pacifist, daughter honoring her father's memory, and young woman forging her own path. Capable of incredible violence, but choosing restraint. Powerful enough to hurt, but disciplined enough to show mercy. That evening, in her apartment's tiny bedroom, Sable opened the box she kept hidden in her closet. The box containing her father's medals and photos, his teaching notes and belt certificates, all the physical remnants of a life devoted to martial arts and discipline. She pulled out a photo of herself at 8 years old, standing beside her father in their gym, both of them in training gear, both with the serious expressions of people who understood that what they practiced wasn't a game, but a responsibility. "I did it, Dad," she whispered to the photo. "I defended myself like you taught me. But more importantly, I showed mercy like you taught me. I used enough force to stop the threat. And then I stopped. I didn't become a bully. I didn't let anger make me cruel. I hope that makes you proud." The photo offered no response, of course, but Sable felt a sense of peace settle over her that she hadn't experienced since before his death. She had been carrying guilt for years. Guilt about his death in an accident she couldn't prevent. Guilt about her mother's financial struggles. Guilt about her own capabilities and whether they made her dangerous. But she understood now that her father's training hadn't been about creating violence. It had been about preventing it, preventing herself from being victimized, but equally importantly, preventing herself from becoming a victimizer. That balance was the real skill he had taught her, and she had finally learned the lesson. The semester continued toward its conclusion. Sable maintained her grades, helped expand the self-defense program, spent time with Bellamy and their growing friend group, taught other students how to protect themselves while emphasizing that physical defense was always the last resort. She watched Garrison continue his transformation, noting with quiet satisfaction when he defended a freshman from harassment, when he apologized to students he had previously bullied, when he used his still considerable social influence to promote kindness instead of cruelty. On the last day of the school year, when summer stretched ahead with its promise of freedom and possibility, Sable and Bellamy sat on their courtyard benches one final time, eating lunch in the warm June sunshine. The year had come full circle, starting with Sable as a frightened new student and ending with her as an established presence, respected and genuinely liked, no longer hiding any part of herself. "College applications next year," Bellamy said, scrolling through her phone. "Can you believe we're going to be seniors? Feels like you just got here." "Feels like I've been here forever," Sable replied. "In a good way, I mean. I actually have a history here now, connections, a reputation that isn't just that poor new girl." "Your reputation is legend," Bellamy corrected with a grin. "I saw some freshmen the other day calling you the parking lot girl and talking about you like you're some kind of folklore hero. It's kind of hilarious." "As long as they understand the real lesson," Sable said, "that defending yourself doesn't make you a bad person, and showing mercy doesn't make you weak. Those things can coexist. They do understand, Bellamy assured her. Trust me, the entire school understands. You've taught everyone that strength and kindness aren't opposites, they're partners. That's your legacy here, Sable. That's what people will remember. As they walked out of Lincoln High that afternoon for the last time before summer break, Sable paused at the main entrance to look back at the building that had been such a crucible for her. She thought about the scared girl who had walked through these doors 9 months ago, determined to remain invisible, terrified of her own capabilities, burdened by promises and grief. That girl had been transformed by fire, not destroyed but refined, forged into someone stronger and more complete. She had learned that true strength wasn't about winning fights. It was about having the courage to stand up for yourself when necessary, the discipline to use only appropriate force, the wisdom to show mercy when you had every right to be merciless, and the character to help others find their own strength rather than hoarding power for yourself. These were the real lessons, the ones that would carry her forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. "Ready?" Bellamy asked, already halfway to her car. "Yeah," Sable said, turning away from the school and toward the future. "I'm ready." As she walked across the parking lot where her life had changed on a rainy November afternoon, Sable felt her father's presence, not as a weight or an obligation, but as a gift. He had given her skills and discipline, had taught her to be strong without being cruel, had shown her that true warriors chose their battles and knew when to show mercy. She had honored that gift, had used it to protect herself and others, had demonstrated that power and compassion could exist in the same person. The video of her parking lot confrontation still lived online, still being shared and discussed, a permanent record of one girl's choice to defend herself with skill and restraint. But Sable didn't need that video to remember who she was or what she had proven. She carried the knowledge deeper now, not in viral fame, but in the confidence of someone who understood their own capabilities and limitations.